Yeah.
Ever get that feeling like you just got to know more about something?
Yeah.
I mean, really dive deep, but without spending hours going down those internet rabbit holes.
Like, you want that expertise, but without the time investment.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
So that's kind of what we're doing here today.
Sounds intriguing. I'm all ears.
We're going deep into Sitabani Forest.
Sitabani Forest.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's near Jim Corbett National Park.
Yeah.
Super dense forest, tons of old ruins just scattered around.
Ruins. Like ancient buildings.
Yeah, like crumbled walls, almost completely overgrown. And then there are these streams cutting through it all. Sounds idyllic, right?
Yeah, it does have a certain peacefulness to it when you describe it like that.
But there's this other side to it, like a real sense of mystery, maybe even a little danger lurking beneath the surface. And that's what we're going to unpack today.
I'm sensing a butt coming. What's the catch with this seemingly peaceful forest?
The shadow people, that's the catch.
Shadow people. Okay, you've definitely got my attention now.
We're talking about stories, legends, actual first-hand accounts of these beings, these shadow people that supposedly haunt Sitabani Forest. And these aren't just campfire stories. What we're looking at comes from horror podcast 4.pdf, and these accounts, they feel real, really unnerving.
So we're diving into some potentially intense personal experiences.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember as we go through this that we're looking at these accounts as they were experienced and shared by the people involved.
Right. Understanding their perspective is key here.
So first things first, the background, the legend of Sitabani. Apparently, centuries ago, it wasn't this deserted place. We're talking a thriving settlement, maybe even a full-blown kingdom.
And then something happened. It just vanished.
Gone. The sources point to some major tragedy, something that completely wiped out everyone who lived there.
Wow. It's fascinating how often societal upheaval or natural disasters get woven into supernatural explanations in folklore. It's like a way for people to process the unexplainable.
Makes sense. And in Sitabani's case, there are two main theories about what happened. One's pretty straightforward, a devastating plague that just swept through and, well, that was it. The other is a bit more legendary. A curse.
A curse, that's more in line with the whole shadow people thing, I guess. What was the curse about?
The story goes that this powerful sage, totally fed up with the kingdom's insane greed and cruelty, decided to, well, curse them.
Oh, wow. So not just random misfortune, but like a consequence of their actions. It's interesting how that moral dimension plays out in so many cultures' folklore. You know, a corrupt society gets its comeuppance.
And that's where the shadow people come in. Locals believe they're the spirits of those people, the inhabitants of this lost kingdom, forever stuck in Sitabani.
So not your typical Casper the Friendly Ghost situation then?
Not even close. These shadow people, they're described as silent and swift, which immediately paints this creepy picture, right? Beings that are there but barely noticeable, maybe just out of the corner of your eye.
Yeah, that definitely adds to the unsettling vibe. It's like you know they're there, but you can't quite grasp them.
And there are these specific sensations that people associate with their presence, like a sudden drastic drop in temperature.
Like when a cold draft just passes right through you.
Exactly. And then goosebumps, that feeling like every hair on your body is standing on end. But the worst part, apparently, is this intense feeling of dread. Not just startled, but like a deep primal fear.
Makes sense, right? Our senses are picking up on something potentially threatening, even if we can't see it clearly. Our brains trigger that fight or flight response.
So let's get into some of the reported encounters. The source starts with a story from the 80s, a group of trekkers going into Sitabani at night. I always wonder why people do that, explore spooky places after dark.
There's a thrill to it, right? The mystery, pushing the boundaries a bit, especially when a place already has that spooky reputation.
So they start their trek, pretty typical night in the forest, crickets chirping, leaves rustling. But as they go deeper, the atmosphere changes. One of the trekkers, Ravi, he feels this freezing cold touch on his shoulder. He turns, nothing's there.
Oh, that's freaky.
Right, they try to brush it off, blame the cold, but then they start hearing things.
Hearing things, like what?
Faint whispers, barely audible at first, and they can't make out any words. It's like the forest itself is murmuring.
Yeah, that takes it to another level, right? Not just something you see or feel, but something that feels like it's invading your personal space.
And then these whispers, they start getting louder, coming from everywhere, as if they're surrounded. And that's when they see them.
Shadow people.
Tall, shadowy figures moving through the trees, no features, just these dark, humanoid shapes, and they seem to just swallow the moonlight.
That's chilling. It messes with your brain because you can't quite process what you're seeing. And that thing about the moonlight, like they're not reflecting it, they're absorbing it. It's just wrong.
Yeah, super creepy. The trekkers obviously freak out. One of them screams, and boom, the figures vanish. They get out of there as fast as they can, never wanting to go back. But for Ravi, it wasn't over.
He couldn't shake the experience.
He kept hearing those whispers, even back at home. And a month later, he was found dead. The expression on his face, pure terror.
Whoa, that's heavy. It's like whatever they saw, it wasn't just a fleeting scare, it left a mark, a really deep, traumatic one.
Then there's Vikram's story, a forest guard. He was a skeptic, 10 years patrolling Sitabani, probably seen his fair share of weird stuff, but didn't buy into the shadow people thing. Until one night,
So what changed his mind?
he's on patrol, and it goes dead quiet. I mean, all the usual nighttime animal sounds just stop. Everything's silent.
That must have been eerie, like the calm before a storm.
Exactly. And then, despite it being a warm night, he gets hit with this sudden, intense cold.
Like the trekkers' experience.
And then he sees it, this dark, humanoid figure, just a few feet away. And get this, it's rippling, almost like it's made of smoke.
Smoke. That's just bizarre. It's like something out of a horror movie. And the paralysis you mentioned, that's common in these kinds of stories. Like, your body just shuts down.
He was frozen, couldn't move, couldn't speak. And then he feels this icy breath on his neck. I can't even imagine.
Oh, that's terrifying.
And then the whispers start. But this time, they feel like they're coming from inside his own head. Low, guttural sounds.
That's even more disturbing than the external whispers. It's like they're getting inside your mind, violating your very being.
Vikram, he was done. Quit his job the next day. Told everyone to stay away from Sitabani after dark. Pretty extreme for someone who didn't even believe in the stories before.
That's a life-altering experience right there. You don't just walk away from your job because you got spooked. Something truly messed him up.
Now, the source material points to these ancient ruins in Sitabani as a kind of a hot spot for shadow people activity. Like maybe it's a gateway or something. And there's this account about a group of archaeologists, scientists, who set up camps near these ruins.
You'd think scientists would be a bit more level-headed about these things.
You'd think, right? Well, middle of the night, they're woken up by footsteps circling their tents.
Classic horror movie trope.
Right. So they go outside and see these shadowy figures moving through the ruins, their forms flickering like flames in a dying fire.
So they're not solid, more like apparitions.
They try to document it. Cameras stop working. Recordings are just static. It's almost comical how often that happens in these stories.
Like the technology itself is rejecting whatever's happening.
Then one of the archaeologists, Anjali, she sees this figure at the edge of the camp. Its head's tilted at this unnatural angle, like it's studying them.
Oh, man.
She looks closer, and it lets out this blood-curdling scream, and then poof, vanishes.
That's a serious escalation. The shadow people were silent in the other stories. This suggests something different. Maybe they felt threatened or something.
The archaeologists, they nope right out of there. The next morning, they pack up and leave, all their equipment, their research, everything. No one's been back since.
You don't abandon a whole expedition unless you've seen some truly scary stuff. Their scientific curiosity went right out the window.
So what does it all mean? Locals have their own take, of course. They say the shadow people aren't just spirits, they're guardians of the forest.
So not malevolent, but protective?
Yeah. And there are these stories about poachers and loggers who disrespected the forest, did stuff that might anger a guardian. They either disappeared or were found dead.
Just like that.
No visible injuries, but the look on their faces, pure terror. Like they saw something so horrifying right before they died.
That reinforces the guardian idea, like they're punishing those who harm the forest, and the lack of injuries suggests something more sinister, something beyond the physical.
And then there's this wilder theory. Some believe the shadow people aren't even from this dimension. They're beings from another reality, drawn to the ancient energy of Sitabani.
Okay, now we're going full sci-fi. But it does add a whole other layer of creepiness, the idea of interdimensional beings. It's the fear of the totally unknown.
But the message, at least from these accounts, is pretty clear. Sitabani belongs to the shadow people. They don't want visitors.
Yeah.
Especially not after dark.
That's a pretty consistent theme throughout all these different stories, even with all the different perspectives and interpretations. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. So let's recap. For everyone listening, we've got these ancient legends of a lost kingdom, a devastating plague or maybe a curse. We've got recurring descriptions of these shadowy figures, the sudden cold, the whispers, the overwhelming dread.
And some really intense first-hand accounts from people who claim to have encountered these shadow people, trekkers, a forest guard, even scientists.
And we've looked at different ways to understand these beings. Are they spirits, guardians of the forest, or something else entirely, something beyond our comprehension?
Which begs the question, are these truly supernatural entities, or is there something psychological at play? Maybe it's a combination of factors, the power of suggestion, the atmosphere of the place, the weight of the local folklore.
It's a fascinating puzzle. What is it about places like Sitabani that breed these kinds of legends? What draws us to these stories, to these glimpses into the unknown? What does our fascination with the unexplained reveal about ourselves?
And thinking even bigger, why do these legends persist in specific locations? What is it about certain places that attract these kinds of narratives? And what can we learn about our own fears and the vastness of what we don't know by examining these stories of the unknown?
Those are some great questions to ponder. I hope this deep dive into Sitabani and its shadow people has given you all something to think about. Maybe even kept you up at night.
Just a little food for thought, and maybe a reason to keep the lights on.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the shadows.
Until next time.
Stay curious, everyone.